in 1782. He was a very gifted violinist, of great renown. His 24 caprices for solo violin were written between 1802 and 1817. They take the form of etudes, with each individual piece calling for a specific skill. Without a doubt, a formidable technique is required to play these pieces convincingly. The general consensus among musicians is that Paganini did not absorb the lesson of implied harmony from the solo violin works of Bach. Earlier on, I drew a comparison between Paganini and Liszt. As it happened, Liszt made arrangements of no less than 5 of Paganini's caprices for the piano. Henryk Wieniawski was born in Lublin in 1835 and died in 1880. Since Wieniawski was born 5 years before Paganini died, the two composers cannot be said to belong to the same generation. However, there is no doubt that the younger composer followed in Paganini's wake. His principal contribution to the realm of solo violin writing is a work called The Modern School, 10 Etudes Caprices. As is the case with Paganini's caprices, each individual piece poses a formidable challenge to the violinist's skill. On listening to the whole collection, I do not have a sense of a profound use of implied harmony. The main exception appears to be the 6th caprice, titled Prelude. Here, one has a definite sense of polyphony in the first section, along with the written-out reprise of that section. Henri Violin was born in Belgium 1820, and being only 15 years older than Wieniawski, he belonged pretty much to the same generation. An early work, 6 Concert Etudes, opus 16, written when the composer was 25, follows in the romantic wake of Paganini. A much later work, 6 Morceaux or 6 Pieces, opus 55, was published posthumously. These very special pieces are much closer to the Bach tradition than to the romantic generation to which Violin belonged. The final piece is called Introduction and Fugue and is arguably the most transparently Bach-like, as the title may suggest. The Belgian violinist and composer Ysaye, spelled Y-S-A-Y-E, was born in Liège in 1858. His principal creative legacy is a set of 6 wonderful sonatas for solo violin, written in 1923. Each sonata is dedicated to a different violinist whom the composer knew personally. The solo sonatas of Ysaye are redolent of the Bach tradition from beginning to end. As surely as the solo pieces of Paganini are primarily monophonic, the sonatas by Ysaye are intrinsically polyphonic. His second sonata even goes so far as to open with a direct quotation from the prelude of Bach's third partita in E major. However, it should be stressed that in Ysaye's solo works, direct quotations are the exception rather than the rule. So if we were to sum up Ysaye's life achievement in just a few words, it might be that he succeeded in absorbing Bach into a more modern-sounding harmonic idiom. On the one hand, his sonatas are traditionally tonal since they are written in a specific key. On the other hand, in certain places, they reflect the influence of Debussy and the French school. For example, the third movement of Sonata Number 1 features perfect fourths alternating with perfect fifths. This would have been strictly forbidden by Bach. So when we come to the solo violin pieces of Bartók and Hindemith, it is not surprising that their sound is even more modern. While both composers are tonal insofar as they employ harmonic centers, there is a tendency to access more notes of the chromatic scale. While Hindemith was younger than Bartók, his works for solo violin precede Bartók's own sonata. Paul Hindemith was born in 1895 in Hanau, a small town in Germany. He died in 1963. Hindemith wrote 3 sonatas for solo violin. His first sonata is in G minor and was completed in 1918. 6 years later, in 1924, he wrote 2 sonatas that comprise his Opus 31. A mere glance at the score of his second sonata tells us that Hindemith had undergone a big change. To begin with, there is an absence of a key signature in each of the 5 movements. Moreover, while the first movement starts on the note A natural, the final movement ends on the note A flat. Maybe the composer was making a statement here to the effect of, if you're looking for a piece that begins and ends in the same key, you won't find it here. There is no doubt that Hindemith was a learned musician who absorbed Bach's practice of implied harmony into the template of his considerably modified harmonic idiom. Bartók wrote his Sonata for Solo Violin in North Carolina in 1944 at the behest of Yehudi Menuhin. It is his only contribution to the idiom. The Bartók sonata reflects close very faithfully the Bach tradition. To begin with, the 4-movement pattern of tempos consciously recalls the same pattern to be heard in Bach's solo sonatas. The first movement of the Bartók is marked with the tempo of a chaconne and opens with a conscious pastiche of Bach's harmonic world. The second movement is a fugue, bearing some of the characteristics of the fugues in Bach's solo sonatas. There is no doubt that the Bartók Sonata is the best known of solo violin works from the last century, in part due to Menuhin's tireless championing and recording of the piece. Not all musicians, however, seem to be in agreement regarding how innate the writing is from a violinistic point of view. On the one hand, the piece is playable. On the other hand, the conductor Anatol Durati, who knew both Bartók and Menuhin personally, has called it a fiendishly difficult work. Menuhin himself was convinced that the piece was almost unplayable after looking over the manuscript for the first time. It is worth recalling that every composer referred to so far, except Bartók, was a violinist. While Bach is remembered primarily as an organist, he was also a highly skilled practitioner of the viola in addition to the violin. Looking at the solo violin world today, my impression is one of great diversity, with each composer doing his or her own thing, which in many respects is refreshing. An example of a very captivating piece written by a living composer is the cadenza for solo violin by the Polish composer Penderecki, and the piece was written in 1984. You'll find more than one live performance of the piece on YouTube. So we now come to my partitura for solo violin. More by coincidence than by design, the piece is written in the same key as the Bach Sonata, G minor. This is a wonderful key for the violin, for it draws on open strings. An open string is the name of the string which sounds when it is not stopped to produce a particular note. So the new piece could be regarded as a prism which refracts different aspects of East European music with a leaning towards the Jewish. It comprises 4 movements. Unlike Bach's solo partituras, the work I have written does not comprise a succession of dance movements. Instead, I have chosen the term partita as a generic title for a multi-movement composition spanning a wide spectrum of emotions and moods. So we will now hear Anna play my piece, which will be the first performance, and after the piece has been played, there will be plenty of scope for questions.